Good evening, I'm George Muller, and this is the July monthly goal discussion for the Mending Fences group, a ministry of the County Cowboy Church of Leon County. And tonight we're going to talk about making amends for the things that we've done that were not right. We've been talking over the past 6 months or so. This is a 12-month program. We're about halfway through it. We've gone through things like making an inventory of our wounds, worries, and weaknesses, and things that we do that were not right. We've tried to get to the point where we can see ourselves as others see us. And that's not so easy to do, because we tend to gloss over a lot of the things that we do that we know are not right, but we don't like to talk about. At any rate, last month in our goal, we talked about asking God to take away, remove our shortcomings. Now, removing the shortcomings, God is willing to do that. He sent Jesus to do that for all of us when he suffered on the cross. But the consequences of those things are still around. And the consequences of the things we do affect other people. And so we have to make amends for those so that we can live with ourselves and be forgiven. Remember in the Lord's Prayer, it says to forgive us our debts as we forgive others. So we have to go and make amends to the people that we've harmed all during the course of our trying to get over our wounds, worries, and weaknesses. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And we're going to take a look at this is really the step where we make a list. Next month we're going to carry out the list. And last month, of course, was an attitude adjustment to ask God to remove our shortcomings and be willing to have God do that. Sometimes that's not so easy, as we learned. Anyway, we're going to make a list of all the persons we have harmed, and we're going to become willing to make amends to all of them. And the list, that we're going to make could be either physical or mental, but the idea is that we want to include all the people directly or indirectly whom we harmed, not who harmed us. This is not a list of our grievances against someone else. It's easy, most people jump to that when we ask them to make amends. They say, well, I'm willing to make amends, but what about all the people who've offended me? And what about all the people who've harmed me? When are they going to make their amends? Well, that's not the way it works. We're going to worry about our things and who we need to make amends to. Okay, we have to be willing. All through here we're talking about being willing to let God remove our shortcomings, even if that's a painful process. So we have to be willing to make amends, even if that's a painful process. It might be painful for both us and the person that we're making amends to. Also, we may find that for some things, the consequences of what we've done are not really amendable. I mean, there are certain things where you can't put it back together again. You all know the old nursery rhyme about Humpty Dumpty. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So there are some things where the amendment process is going to be so difficult that it's not possible, maybe. If you have to go back and somehow reverse time in order to make amends, that won't work. Time does not go backwards. So you wouldn't be able to do it. If you murder somebody, and I don't think we're talking about that here, but if you did, or the equivalent, let's say, that's hard to undo. Once they're dead, they're dead. And there's no way to go back and redo it. You don't get do-overs for that. There are some things which you can't do over. Okay. We may also not be able to make amends because making them may cause more harm than they actually fix. They may not be practical. So we have to consider when we're making the list, how are we going to do it? One way to figure it out is to think in reverse. What about the people who've offended you and or done something to harm you? What would you want them to do to make amends to you? And you can then turn that around and say, okay, what have I done that's similar? Would I do the same thing to make amends to them? Now let's just talk a little bit about amending. It seems like over the past 10, 20 years, the amendments to the Constitution have gotten a lot of play, particularly the First and Second Amendments. And by the way, the First and Second Amendments are really not the First and Second, they're really the Third and Fourth. And what happened was when they finished the Constitution back in 1789 or so, they realized that they didn't have a Bill of Rights in it. And the representatives at the convention said, we've got to have a list of what the rights of the people are. The Constitution kind of sets up the government. But we want a list in there that says what the people are, what the rights of the people are, so that the government can't override them. And as a matter of fact, they wouldn't have passed they wouldn't have ratified the Constitution for some of the delegates there unless there was a Bill of Rights. So they appointed a committee to take a look at all the things that people had suggested should be part of the Bill of Rights. And then that committee finally whittled it down from some several hundred rights down to 12. And then they voted on the 12 as to whether or not they should be put into the Constitution as the First Amendments to it. Well, the first and second ones didn't pass. And so the third through the 12th, those 10 became the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Now, you're wondering what happened with 1 and 2. Well, 1 is still there. 1 is still pending from 1789. And so far, it hasn't been ratified, and it doesn't have a clause in it that says after a while it expires, so it's still there. It has to do with the way the representation of the population is calculated as to how many representatives you get. The number 2-1 took 202 years before it finally got ratified. It got ratified, I think, in 1776 to 1978. And it became the 27th Amendment to the Constitution, the last one so far. And it had to do, wait for this now, the question of congressional salaries. And what it said was that you can't change the Congress's salaries unless there is an election in between the time you make the change, or say that there's going to be a change, and the change occurs. So that's number 27. At any rate, you can see that making amendments and making amends may be a long-term process. It may not be a matter of just going up to somebody and saying, oh, please forgive me for what I've done. You may have a longer-term chore on your hands of truly making amends. You may have to amend your own thinking in order to make amends to the other person. Okay. There was, a while back, there was a film, forgiving and amending, making amends and forgiving is a difficult thing to do. And there was a film, probably now 5 or 10 years ago, called The Crossroads. And it was a story of forgiveness, the movie. And it was a matter of how this man developed a forgiveness for the person who was a teenager whose actions resulted in his wife's death. Not the teenager's wife's death, but the man's wife's death. And how they finally came to being able to, how he came to be able to forgive him, and how the young teenager came to be able to accept forgiveness. We also sometimes think of making amends as an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And what an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth does is you wind up with two blind people and two toothless people instead of one. So we don't want to do that. We also got to realize that when we try to make amends, we're not responsible for how those people that we're making amends to respond. That's their problem. Our problem is we have to make the amends. And the amends have to be made in good faith. Just covering it over is not going to do it. You also have to be responsible for the consequences of what you've done. There are consequences. God may forgive you for the things you've done. That doesn't necessarily mean the consequences go away. Certainly they don't go away for the person you harmed. And include yourself, because sometimes the collateral damage from some of the things you do affects you, and you become the damaged one, maybe even more so than the person that you offended. Okay, and finally, doing step 8, or doing this step rather, this goal, maybe will make us willing to accept people who have harmed us, asking for our forgiveness. It works in reverse thing of the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our debts as we forgive others. And so we have to be careful that we're able to do that. Okay. Okay. Let me go on here. Okay, we talked about the making amends process kind of gets us involved back again with our pride and our ego. Just like it made us hard to make the list of things that we've done, our pride and our egos get in the way of making amends also. That's another thing where we kind of don't like to admit we've done something. We also don't like to have to go to somebody and tell them that we've done something and that we're sorry we did that. For some reason that's not something that comes naturally to us. We tend to come up with all kinds of excuses as to why we shouldn't either have to do it or don't do it or don't want to do it. We come up with, well, it's in the past, I can't do anything about it, it's over and done with. Nothing can be changed now, and we'll protest. And of course we point out the people that we said who harmed us, when is it their turn? Or I'll make my amends as soon as they do. I'm a chemical engineer, and I was worked for an engineering construction company. I was a project engineer and a project manager, and inevitably when we were doing a project, we would get to early in the project, we would get to the point where there'd be an argument between the pipers and the electrical people and the civil people as to who was going to finish their design first, who was going to design the pipe stanchions, or the pipe people, the civil people would say, well, I can't do that until I know what kind of pipe you got and where you're going to go. And the piping people would say, well, we can't really lay out the pipe until we know where you're going to put the supports. And the electrical people would say, well, we don't know where we're going to put our electrical stuff until we know where the pipe stand is going. So they'd argue among themselves about who's going to do what to whom first. And that's kind of what we do with our amending process. We say, well, I would like these other people to make amends to me first. Okay. Anyway, those are all excuses. But we have to get by that. We have to make our list. We have to identify. Remember, we're not going to really do this yet. We're making the list because we need to identify who it is we're going to make amends to. At the same time we're identifying whom, we've got to identify how we're going to do it. And we need to, in making the list, see whether or not it's possible to make amends. So we need to kind of weed out the ones where it's either more harmful to make the amend than they would help, or we can't really effectively make an amend for something that we've done. In some cases, what's done is done, and there's no way to change it. It's like the old joke about putting toothpaste back in the tube. It's probably possible, but it's very difficult. The only way you get the toothpaste in the tube is when you make the tube of toothpaste. Once the toothpaste is out, it's hard to put it back. So we're doing two things when we're doing this. We're identifying where we're going to work, where we're going to make the amends, and getting ready for next month where we're going to actually do it. And we're also making the list so that we can decide which people it is we're going to make amends to, which ones are necessary, which ones would do more harm than good, which ones are not possible. Now, making amends could be that you don't necessarily do something to or for the person that you offended or harmed, but you gear up yourself to say, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. I know what happens when I do that, and I know that when I do that, I can't fix it. And so I'm not going to do it anymore. And that would be a way to make amends for things where it can't be fixed. And just promise not to do it again. I thought about when I was reading over my notes for this goal, I thought about our current situation with masks and distancing and hygiene habits to combat the coronavirus. And I thought about, well, there's a lot of talk now about, people not wearing masks, people not doing what they're supposed to, people not distancing, people not doing the hand washing and the sanitizing and so forth. Is that really right? I personally have a problem with people not wearing masks and doing that. I'm in a situation where I have medical problems, and if I got the virus, it would not be the same as someone much younger or without medical conditions getting the virus. So I go out with a mask all the time. And I put on Facebook that when I go out with my mask on, I feel like the Lone Ranger. I'm the only one there with a mask, and everybody's asking, who is that masked man? I'm going to get me a permit to carry, and I'm going to get some silver bullets, and I've already got a 6-shooter. I'll be all set. All I got to do is put the mask on. At any rate, I would ask you to think about if you don't wear a mask, and the consequences of that are that you maybe happen to have the virus and you're asymptomatic and you don't know it, and you give it to someone else inadvertently, unintentionally, and they give it to someone else, and eventually it gets to someone who gets a full-blown case of the coronavirus and possibly dies. Now, how do you make amends for that? That's one of the cases where it's not possible. The answer to that one is wear the mask. Then you won't have that problem, and that won't happen. Okay. That's my political harangue for tonight. Okay, well, I think we pretty well covered this. I just wanted you to know about making amends, that it's not so easy to do, but it's something we need to do. And we need to get ready for the next step for next month, where we're actually going to do it. We're going to actually plow up the hard ground of our hearts, and we're going to make amends and we're gonna go move forward from there. And remember the last point is one more thing is when we make a list of people we've hurt, we often leave ourselves off. And lots of times that's the person who gets hurt the most. That's why we have Mending Fences, to take care of our wounds, worries, and weaknesses. Our wounds, worries, and weaknesses. Now, we do also support one another. And so we help with other people's wounds, worries, and weaknesses also. But the person sometimes who's most harmed is ourselves. So now we're ready for the next goal next month. Thank you for looking at this video. I hope that it helps you to make amends to the people that you've harmed.